Fresh as snow, Irma and Justin McIntyre, after 50 years of marriage, found themselves falling into a daily routine. Every morning at 6 a.m., Irma would get up and go into the kitchen to prepare breakfast for Justin while he shaved and showered. They would sit together at 6:30 a.m. to eat a meal that usually consisted of boiled eggs, toast, and a bowl of oatmeal. Following breakfast, Justin would retrieve the newspaper from the mailbox, sit in the den by the fireplace, and read the paper until 8 a.m. Irma would clean up the breakfast dishes, then go make the bed and tidy up the bedrooms and bathroom before bathing. Usually, by 10 a.m., Justin was ready for a nap and Irma would fill in the time by gossiping on the phone with her friends from the bridge club. It was becoming a marriage of convenience more than a marriage of love and unpredictability as it was when they first met. Irma had convinced Justin that they should move to Florida after he retired. That was 5 years earlier. It seemed like a great idea to Justin in the beginning, however, as time began to pass, he started to miss his friends back in Canada. They did not have any family left. The one child that they had was tragically killed in a car accident years before they had moved away. Irma, on the other hand, adapted to her new surroundings easily and made new friends very quickly. As Justin laid in bed, he started thinking back to the early years of their marriage when they could not keep their hands off one another. They would travel the world in search of adventure, taking in the beauty of nature and the amazing architecture of Europe. They never grew tired of each other's company. He began to wonder where it all started going downhill. They rarely talked to one another anymore, let alone touched each other. They even started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Irma said it was because of his snoring, but he felt there was more to it. At 70 years of age, Justin knew that he did not have the stamina that he once had. Perhaps, he thought, Irma was growing bored of him. He could not blame her though, he was growing bored himself. Just after lunch, Justin received a phone call from a friend he had made at the local barbershop. Louis Davidson was a former Navy man that served in several naval conflicts during his career. He invited Justin out to go fishing on his boat. Justin happily accepted and made his way to the marina. At slip number 30, Louis stood upon the deck of a 92-foot Sea Force 9 fishing boat. "Permission to come aboard, Captain." Justin shouted up to his friend, "Permission granted." "Come aboard, sailor." Louis fired up the diesel engine and untied the spring line from the dock cleat before backing out of the slip. The sound of the engine reminded Justin of his younger days when he drove a tractor-trailer for a living. They slowly made their way out into the open waters and Louis pushed ahead on the throttle. The engine came to life and thrust the boat forward. The spray from the seawater felt refreshing on Justin's face, though the rough water further into the ocean was almost more than Justin's stomach could handle. He hung his head over the side and saw 2 dolphins swimming alongside them. Suddenly, his nausea began to disappear, and he began to enjoy himself more. They traveled about 30 minutes from shore until no sign of land or other boats could be seen. Louis dropped the anchor and prepared the fishing lines. Each was equipped with a Shimano Tiagra reel and 130-pound monofilament fishing line. Louis helped Justin strap into his harness, then he cast the line out into the water before placing the rod's handle into the holder. "My friend," Louis began saying, "you are in for a treat. This is my favorite fishing spot. I guarantee a hit within 5 minutes." No sooner did he finish talking when Justin's fishing rod began to bob up and down. Something was nibbling at the bait. Justin went to grab for the rod, but Louis told him to be patient. Louis carefully removed the rod from the holder, let out some slack on the line, then handed it to Justin. "Okay, Justin, when I tell you to, I want you to give the rod a quick yank back over your shoulder. Ready? Now." Justin whipped the rod back over his right shoulder, barely missing the head of his friend. The fish was hooked and was trying to make a run for it. Justin nearly dropped the rod from the strength of the fish. Louis quickly grabbed onto the rod and placed it back into the holder. They let out some slack on the line and let the fish run before locking it back up again. The back-and-forth fight for supremacy between man and fish kept up for nearly 30 minutes until the fish finally stopped struggling. With the help of Lewis, Justin reeled in the monster.
The talk, he couldn't believe it. It happened again. Every time he and his wife tried to have a serious conversation, it spiraled out of control. And he wasn't going to take the blame this time. It wasn't his fault, she felt as frustrated as he did. Though for obviously different reasons. She sat in the new car with the key in the ignition. Maybe she should just take off driving and never come back. The man was successful in his business. He knew how to negotiate. He'd brokered deals that others had deemed impossible. Why couldn't he talk to his wife? This was a problem he could solve. The woman sat on various committees. She organized various groups and networking events. She engaged large audiences with style and finesse. She would reach her husband. He was such an effective negotiator because he knew how to identify needs. He found out what the other side wanted and positioned himself as the only provider. Then he could set prices and terms they could hardly refuse. Marriage is no different. He could do this. Her judo instructor once told her that the skills she was learning can apply in all areas of life. Judo had taught her balance, coordination, and the ability to take down someone way bigger. A top judo student, she also got a good cardio workout. Could these principles apply in her marriage? She was willing to try anything at this point. He'd made his decision. He held the phone in his hand to call her. The car was still in the driveway, but he wanted to keep this businesslike. He would set an appointment. He made the call. She'd made her decision. She held the car keys in her hand because she wasn't going anywhere. There was no running away from this fight. She would tackle the threat without causing harm to her opponent. The phone rang. "Hello, dear," he began, turning on the charm. "I believe we need to talk before either of us makes a decision we'll later regret." That's right, take no blame but include himself as part of the solution. "Can you be back in about an hour? I'll have wine and cheese." "Honey," she answered, feigning surprise at the call. She would not let him be the peacemaker. "I was holding the phone just now to call you with the same idea." Like in judo, position was everything. To their plans, she entered her home 45 minutes later. She hadn't left her property, but in her mind's eye, she traveled to the dojo downtown. She had sparred with the best student there, so her senses were sharp, and her mind was calm. Arriving 15 minutes early would put her husband off balance. The man watched his wife enter the front door. She was early but not unexpected. In his negotiations, he always expected someone to be early. To really throw him off balance, she should have been late. "It's so good to see you," he said, extending the glass of Moscato. One of the first lessons she learned in judo was to use the other's strength to your advantage. She accepted the glass and with the grace of a ballerina took her husband into a half embrace. She whispered in his ear, "You chose the right bottle. There's gorgonzola in the fridge." She felt him lose his footing, not much, but enough. This was completely unexpected. The normal routine had been hysterical screaming and threats. It would appear his wife was changing her tactics as well. Would this affect his strategy? Only time would tell. She released him from the embrace and took in the scene. It was her turn to be caught off guard. Their home was always ordered and immaculate. They argued over many things, but cleanliness was never a subject. He saw her eyes widen for just a moment before she lowered her mask of disinterest again. He smiled to himself because he saw the shock. He had staged a catastrophe in chairs and couches, leaving nothing in its original place. "I panicked after you left," he supplied. His sweeping gesture took in the disaster that had been their front room. "So, you figured you'd wreck the place and have me clean up after you?" Her judo skills and keen wit were on full display. "Get back in control. It's not your best look." She finished. "Of course not, baby," he crooned. I've spent the last hour straightening things up. You should have seen it before. I thought I'd lost you. He looked defeated as he said the last few words. That strike landed squarely in her heart. She always had a soft spot for his helplessness. Seeing him in the rain without an umbrella was how they had first met. But her dealings with various committees had taught her well. She was not swayed by sympathy anymore. The man felt no warmth in her touch. There was no softness in her eyes. His plan had been to position himself as the one needing saving. Her instincts would kick in and she would forgive him. He would then set the price and the terms of their reconciliation. 3. The impasse. The wife spoke first. Before the wine gets warm or the cheese dries out, let's talk. She felt herself in control. This was like a judo match, like tea.